my work was not cut out, rather I don't have to work. It's a panel of people, as you'll very soon discover, who are really engaged in the sector. They're not here by accident, but by design. And that makes an enormous difference in what they say and what they will be talking with. This is a very young population, which actually means that this is the right population to speak about AI. It's they for whom the entire thing is focused on and should be focused on, and that's something very good. So, without letting my voice fill the room, I'd ask, before this session, we had a bit of a discussion with our panel about who would go in which order. Nothing very significant, but I would start with Deepak. Deepak, just lay out basic regulatory issues that you would want. I mean, there are lots of issues on AI that one can talk about throughout the day till the kingdom comes. But like on the regulatory issues, what are the first couple of principles that you would want to look at? And as I said, we'll have a strict housekeeping rule. So your time starts now for the next 5 minutes.
Thanks, Shubho, and good morning, everyone. So 3 things here. Number 1, a regulation in any sector, in any activity, is basically to ensure that things remain proper. That means, on one hand, yes, we would like people to have freedom of ease of doing business, freedom to operate, freedom of choice, etc. But when those choices are not really available in the real sense, when those choices are constrained or are manipulated or are manipulative, that's where the regulation needs to kick in. And by the way, Shubho heads the Center for Regulatory Studies at Jindal University, apart from being consulting editor of a leading business daily. So that's one part. Coming to AI, number 1, even before AI, I would say that technology is way beyond just digital technology. I mean, we all, yes, I did, there was some fluke, that's how I got into IIT, did engineering, etc. But by the way, but not anything to do with digital, I did in metallurgy. But the fact is that within technology, digital is one part of it, telecom, IT, broadcasting, etc. But there's a lot more within the technology space. Unfortunate part, I would say, is that today we take technology policy only as digital. So we are self-limiting. Similarly, AI is way, way more than just generative AI. Since November 30, 2022, most of our discussion, most of our discourse and debate is around generative AI. And now, of course, the further variants like agentic AI and AI agents, etc. But AI itself is also way, way beyond that, although the term itself had been coined way back in 1956 as artificial intelligence. Now, from this perspective, when we are looking at regulatory principles, there's one particular sector that comes to my mind where we can draw some inspiration, which is automobiles. Again, think about the term automobiles. So it's not just a mobility, it's auto. There's something which is happening automatically. But that doesn't mean that there's no responsibility framework there. Of course, it evolved over the past century plus now. So the way things happened was that currently we have a responsibility of OEMs, the people who make it. So people who make it, there are emission norms, there are things like that, there are certain safety standards, etc. That's what they need to do. Then there are things which need to be done by the owner. So the owner needs to have a registration, they need to have an insurance, etc. There are also things for the user, the driver especially. So the driver needs to have a driving license, some sort of competency, etc. There are also rules of the road in terms of how you'll drive, lane driving, etc., etc. You also have traffic lights. So there's a role of the state to have traffic lights, to have these rules of the road. You have zebra crossing, etc. But very importantly, a lot of times we think that there's no role for a user or a non-user for that matter. And that's not so. For example, even a non-user needs to follow certain norms. So if there's a traffic light, the non-user, even if they are not using any of the automobile, or they have never used, or they might never use, they still are supposed to use a zebra crossing for crossing and not jaywalking. Okay, so there are norms, there are obligations even on the non-users. Otherwise, things may be harmful not only to others, but also to those non-users. So from that perspective, I would say that we need to have a whole of society approach in these type of things, and have a, we can't anticipate all type of risks. We can't anticipate, but there are few things which can be anticipated. For example, you can anticipate the type of volumes that are going to increase when you create a new highway in terms of the number of car units or number of people who will be using, etc. So there are certain things which can be anticipated. There are certain other things which just cannot be anticipated. I don't know how many of you remember, some of us are old enough to remember the days when one could smoke on a flight, literally, okay? And if you have flown on some of the older planes, even today you'll see those things where there's an ashtray. 15 years back, you could actually take a laptop in check-in bag. There's no problem. Water bottles, no problem. Liquids, no problem at all, okay? But because of certain crises, because of certain incidents, etc., new type of risks have emerged. And
I do think that's a very good example that you gave, Deepak. Automobile design and regulation is just a very good example of where AI should not be going. Over the years, over the decades, centuries, automobiles have been designed for automobile users. It has not looked at society, that people who walk on the roads. The idea was transportation, the idea was people's mobility. Automobile sector is one great example of where none of these was actually incorporated into people's needs. So jaywalkers come last. In fact, they're called jaywalkers. People who use the pedestrian is not a jaywalker. Pedestrian is using the road by right. But typically in many cities, and there's now a pushback that automobiles is not the reason why a city should have roads. Roads should be for the people. So I think when we are talking about, and that's a very good example that you gave, that when we are talking about AI and we are talking about a whole of society approach, that's exactly where we should not be going. Because when it gets controlled by a particular user group, the industry group, the interest of the society actually gets harmed. Which is where I want to bring in Subbu. Privacy. That's another very strong aspect of AI. It's almost the same thing as that people's rights. So privacy by design, privacy in regulation, where do you look at it?
Yeah, thank you. First of all, thank for John Deepak ji on aspects related to the kind of generative AI, a class of workloads. Then you have deep learning workloads, like for navigation and things like that, which are like predictive analytics, right? So you have, and then there are typically data processing kind of workloads. So when you look at the AI workload design or development perspective, you have different workloads that are there. Now let's slightly get into two aspects which I want to touch upon. When you look at that, you zoom in, you see two things which are important, at least to me. One is the models themselves. The second one is the data. Now let's talk about the model. When you look at the models, generally there is an approach. Many of you are researchers and innovators. You pick up certain things and then you kind of customize it for your development and then you use it. When you look at the approach that is available today, you have something called as open-weighted models or closed-weighted models. Now, when you are talking about accountability per se, this is very important because when you take a closed-weighted model, right, you will not be able to give a justification or justice for the transparency and the way in which you want to fine-tune for your use case. These are models that are available with APIs with inherent qualities of itself. So whereas if you want to adopt it for your own use case, you will not be able to too much play around with it as a developer. So then you end up with some kind of a constrained development. But on the other hand, if you look at the open-weighted models, these are ones which actually gives you handles to go and fine-tune, refine, and develop. And it gives the freedom for the developer as well as it gives the freedom for the assessor. I mean, from the assessment point of view, from a buyer or from an adopting or a deployment agency. And they can convince themselves about the nuances of it, whether it has been refined and customized for it. So the open model versus closed model. Now, another aspect of it is if you look at closed model, since it is pretty easy for a developer, because it becomes pretty easy. You know, you don't have to do much off the shelf. You just roll it out and you're quick and then you do it. And so it's very fast to develop and the performance are found to be more efficient there. The reason is it's already done, work is done, you don't have to do much in that. So this gets the developers move on to that side and you end up more in those kind of development, which is a real concern. Now on the other side, you need to have an infrastructure, you need to have data, you need to have learning and all that kind of effort required into it, which is so this is the fact. So this has to be navigated. So when one adopts AI system, they need to be aware of these principles and mechanisms under which these models are getting developed and how are we going to deploy it. So this is one part of the story. The second part of the story is the data. See, age long since internet has been over there, we have seen cyber security talking about data in two contexts. One is data at rest and data at transmission or transit, right? So you have established principles for ages now using transport layer security, TLS, SSL kind of stuff for transmission security. And then you have data at rest, standard crypto algorithms like advanced encryption standard and things like that to safeguard it. Now the new thing that is of a real concern now when AI comes into picture is about the computational elements that are coming into picture when you have the data getting processed. So what happens to that? What are all the elements that this kind of algorithm is doing with that data? Is it safe and secure in that? So this is a new kind of a concern. So here you talk about the privacy enabled techniques or what they generally call PETs, right? So today you have various opportunities in the cryptographic domain with various schemes. You have schemes like differential privacy. So for example, if you are using some of the browsers, I don't want to name any, some of the browsers which are already using it in your phones or your laptop, they already implement the differential privacy primitive. So where you have the data, for example, the URLs what you are getting visited and all that stuff, it gets kind of transformed into it by adding a salt to it. It becomes slightly different, but then the property of the data doesn't get changed. That's the beauty of this kind of a approach in differential privacy. This is one class of thing that you can do. Then there are opportunities, for example, if somebody is from bioinformatics or from a health domain, and they have serious concerns of data, they just cannot want to also export it, as well as, but they want to do certain analytics. Then you have interesting primitives like homomorphic encryption. So where you convert the data into a ciphertext using a fantastic method of math, and the beauty of the math is such that you will be able to do the analysis in the ciphertext itself. What otherwise you would do in the plain text. So that's the beauty of it. Of course, these are partial homomorphic function and fully homomorphic function which are getting evolved. It's not at industry ready for rollout, but there are, and it comes with huge cost in the sense with respect to the performance as concerned, performance cost. Then you have aspects related to federated learning, right? Which we all know in the context of AI, that is what it is. And then you have secure multi-party computation. A lot of schemes.
So I'll just want to ask you here, I mean, of course, I thought the computational structure, the compute structures that's coming along, should regulations look beyond overall principles to get into these details? The reason I'm asking is, should the state with its differential capacity. And when a state uses anything, it always becomes a hammer rather than anything else. Right. Should it be looking at these nuances, or should it remain at the first principle? So just your first thoughts, and then we'll again come back to that.
Yeah, I agree with you. See, this is a tricky question because, see, you need to have innovation first. Globally, we are seeing this, right? The other day when we were talking also, there are already different levels of maturity at different state level and federal level and all that stuff. So we know there are multiple levels of complexity. So I agree with you. At a first level, I think you need to at least be aware whether the user should be at least aware. You need not have to have a hammer kind of approach, but you be aware of it that, yeah, this is based on this kind of a principle. To that extent, I think it's important not to get into, for example, if you want to do an assessment of it. For example, if you say any neural network based learning method, it's almost like a black box. It's very difficult for one to, even for the developer to prove to you the explainability and things like that. But there are evaluation techniques that are coming up. Like there are certain global level primitives and assessment you can do, and then you take certain snapshots of decision what has been made and then trace back to find out. These are work in progress. So even at the globe, I don't think we should jump into it to say that we have to get the regulatory control of it, but we need to keep a watch on it and be aware of it. Yeah.
I'll just want to come here to you right now. Is the energy load of this particular building, because that's something that's going to be talked about. When you young people will be pushing out products, I suppose society will also be saying that is the cost, is there a subsidy that is being built in by the state which is disproportionately high compared to the output that's generated. So there are lots of issues. That's at the very first level. So when the first level ideas on the energy matrix that's coming up vis-a-vis AI. I mean, that's where regulation actually would be working on very strongly.
Sure. Hello. Like I worked in generation, I worked in transmission, renewables as well, right now into the electric vehicles, energy storage, as well as the manufacturing part of it as well. So when I say the importance of critical infra, especially for power, I talk about the entire ecosystem of the power, not just limited to the particular portion of the power. So yes, we have one good thing which happens in India. That's how we drive the policies in India. It's an intent driven. Like somebody says that we wanted to achieve 500 gigawatt of renewable energy by 2030, we'll start by that. And if somebody says we want to have electrification of complete electric vehicles by 30% by 2030, we'll start by that. But the problem right now, what I see in entire value chain is that we don't do the reverse engineering or the backward engineering. The intent is right, intent driven is right. But having said that, are we taking those decisions based on the data driven or analysis driven? Like how are we going to do it? So that is where the major gap. If you see some of the failures of some of the PLIs is nothing from some of the incentive structures which was given by Government of India. So the reason because why they were failing, but because those backward engineering or the complete analysis part is missing before coming to that area. So that's where I believe, especially for the power sector, before we get into that jump into intent, that is right. But tomorrow, by 2047 vision, we call for power as well as for the other sectors as well. But this has to be, especially in the terms of net zero, we are talking about 2070. Of course, the data line is different, but the kind of policies we are building from 30 years before today has to be data-driven, policy-driven. That policy decisions has to be very mindfully taken what we have to do it. So that's where the digital infra plays a major role. I believe it is TTA, which is important for any department, any sector in the concern. What is TTA? T, transparency. What is happening where? See, this ideology has to be available with everybody. Second, traceability. What is getting out into the market today, where it is going to end up. I'm just citing an example of batteries. So you are having a mobile phone today. So you might be using it, and then you will be giving it back, or you are just throwing it. You should have that traceability, where it is generated, where it is going in. This is there for the mobiles, but coming to the power sector is still new. We haven't done there, but we have started installing the projects. That's where the traceability is important. Third, accountability. If tomorrow, 7 years down the line, this has to be discarded or this has to be recycled, who has to be accounted for? Which ministry has to come accounted for? Because we have different ministries at center, we have different platforms at states. So somewhere that roles are not assigned yet. So that's also TTA, I call traceability, transparency, and accountability. For these three things to happen, if digital infra is the key, then the brain will be AI. Because that's where we understand where the cyber security concerns, because power is again a very, very critical infra. We have seen complete wash down of grids or some blockout of grids in many of the countries. In fact, we also in India, when we have the frequency deviations, just for a second, that end up in grid failures, right? We have new technologies which we can make literally, if non-power background people here, we plan power in 15 minutes interval. We see every 15 minutes how it is going to produce. That's how we do it. But if you see the advanced countries, it can do it even in the 5 minutes interval. If we have technologies which can immediately back up, give it back in 4 seconds, 5 seconds, such as energy storage, etc. We have that kind of technologies. The more you are seeing EVs in the roads, the more you are seeing smart grids coming into the place. Power quality is a very, very important question. How do we ensure, with the so much of vehicle to grid integration is happening or the back power is coming, do we ensure that power quality comes in? That's where the digital infra plays a major role. Government of India has done a first step towards it with the name called India Energy Stack, to make the entire grid have a digital infra ready. But having said that, that's where the AI plays a major role. Even in order to go to that AI, we have to first of all see from the ground level of challenges, is the discoms ready? Is the capex requirement is ready? If we have to monetize, if we have to build that kind of infra at the states, do they have already, discoms are having severe burdens. They are still not out from the financial burdens they face. So these things has to be planned, and next 5 years or 10 years, this is going to be a major game changer for India. That's what I believe.
Yeah. I don't need to get the mic. You've heard all the three, Rajesh. So now, taking the first stage account agentic AI, the generative AI right now, but look at just the building blocks, what are there. Should the accountability or should the regulatory framework then look at just those? Subbu talked about the fact that there is a huge amount of backroom, obviously, I won't say backroom, that's actually the front room, where the work is going along in detailing, but should the government be looking into those issues? He talked about the way the data is being used and that, but should the government be looking at even those issues at all? And but at the other extreme, as Bindu was saying, that to ensure that there's proportionality in terms of usage of state resources like power, when it'll all be AI need-based structure that needs to be comes in. And of course, finally, we all in the room, the users, where should some of our first regulatory principles be looking at for this sector?
Yeah, thanks, Shubhamai. Good morning, everybody. So, as he was mentioning, people have covered various aspects of how regulation works in these kind of things, especially in the case of AI. But I come from a background of aviation, which is one of my work. So I had the privilege of seeing how the sector has developed for the last 20 years. I think one of the interesting things that had happened in the last week, I don't know how many of you are reading the newspaper where you had a spoofing incident and 500 flights were delayed in Delhi. How many of you are aware? You're aware, yeah, right. What if one of you were in the flight and how you would have felt it? Huh? Huh?
Clueless, because we won't know at that time.
Yeah, clueless is one, but if you had known the fear. So one of the most things about aviation is it's one sector which is completely based on safety, precision, and trust. So those are the three critical factors. And it's one sector, again, it's not only most regulated, but all over the world, it is the same protocols. No other sector in the world has got the same protocols. And the closest to that is probably health. But again, in health, since this entire human element is there in terms of interference, so there's a chance of error. So aviation is one sector. It's completely based on safety, precision, and trust. So now what's happening in for the aviation? The spoofing incident, I was just talking to Mr. Subramanian. He was just telling me that this is something which we couldn't have done. All it needs, you know.
It was like our own Halloween.
Absolutely. All it needs is one small gadget, smaller than the size of this bottle, or not in the bottle, the cap. The cap of the bottle is just kind of programmed and kept around the airport or even 2-3 miles away from the airport. It can disrupt the entire system. And if you want to go and check out who did this or what it is, nobody can do anything. It's so easy because in terms of machine learning, what you build and what it is. So now that one incident that has happened, there's already machine learning happening, and that can lead on to many more. So that's the risk at which you have. And so as he was talking about mobility, so aviation, we talk about flying, but it's actually about mobility at a faster pace and quicker. I think that's what it is. Otherwise, you would have chosen to go by car or train or whatever it is. And it's one of the high risk and high risk things. So today I'm just going to talk about a few aspects of this, what it requires and what the AI plays, you know. So aviation means everything from the time you decide to kind of book a ticket. When it starts from booking a ticket down to leaving the airport with your baggage. So there are multiple entities which are involved. Is the ticket management systems, then you have the airline, then you have the airport, you have the air traffic operations. And when you're in flight, you have different ATCs working with you in terms of safety. And then when you land, you have the baggage system. So it's like a complex grid of so many things that make it happen. I mean, the other mobility systems also have this, but the complexity of this is very unique in the sense that it's designed to just not only fit in, but work at a certain pace to move in. So in this, there is already a lot of AI which has been incorporated over the last 20, 30 years. So what you're talking about of AI in the current sense of the term AI is very different. So now the AI has become an area of concern simply for two reasons, because of the spoofing incidents or risks or whatever it is involved. So you would have had incidences when you were flying that suddenly they say that there's a technical glitch and we have to stay back, we are going to delay. So these are all, they've already been programmed. So the aircraft systems, the avionics systems, all have been programmed through aviation. And this is also one very interesting sector that every mistake which happens in the system is available for all the stakeholders all over the world. Suppose today my baggage system exploded over here. The company makes it available that this can happen in, not only the aircrafts are one thing, it can happen some XYZ country. So it's all there. So it's a continuous learning process, they keep incorporating into it. So, but with a coherent regulatory framework, we risk introducing, without a regulatory framework, we risk introducing uncertainty. So here, as you all know, technical things, algorithms differ, data differs, use cases differ, risks even more, they differ. So the same model behaves differently when retained with new data. Now, whatever we have done, now if you kind of move it, it'll become very different for us. So what would we be doing is prescriptive rules, they freeze innovation. So what would we require in this entire aviation regulation is about, we would be having us in aviation would be about AI safety management systems. So you cannot tell that you have to use this particular hardware, you cannot tell that you have to use this particular software, all this. You only have to have an outcome and it has to be safety management system.
This question is, in the aviation part. Reason being, of course, for what happened recently, of course, stemming from there. But also trying to understand that you rightly said that aviation is a very important sector and something which affects which affects each one of us nowadays. So I just wanted to understand that when Sir was talking about, again, coming back to accountability, when something happens in the aviation sector and you have so-called stringent regulations for it, who is actually accountable for it and how do we kind of curb that? Because I think we have come a long way now. So we are really not starting at the very basics. So how do we kind of overcome that?
So currently the system in India is slightly, Director General for Civil Aviation is the one which brings out all these regulations with regard to airlines, operations, cargo handling, whatever, or what your issues as a passenger. If they say that suddenly you should have so many wheelchairs, all this, so everything. BCA is Civil Aviation Security. So that's the one which takes care of the security protocols, which as he was mentioning, once upon a time cigarettes were allowed, now laptops are not allowed, suddenly they'll tell water is not allowed. So they keep changing. So due to threat perceptions and whatever it is, so you have them. When it comes to the pricing issues, cost and all, there's an economic regulator. So there are multiple people on this. So when it comes to safety again here, then it's DGCA, BCAS and Ministry of Civil Aviation. So it's interesting that this is thing of centralization and decentralization. Would you like to have one like what USA has got, Federal Aviation Authority, who takes care of everything, or you want to have multiple? So we have been experimenting with these three things, which personally I am not very convinced that they're doing a very proactive job. Advancements which keep happening. So many of these people who are posted in this come on deputation from other departments. So that's the thing. So you do have a structure for accountability, and one interesting thing about aviation, as I say, is one small air crash, small incident will be reported in all the newspapers worldwide. But there are more people dying on the way to the airport, which people will not. So it's very heavily under scrutiny. So the accountability in a way is a challenge, I do agree. So it's time that, government kind of looks at it, I mean, this classic example is the Air India accident, which had happened recently. So there have been kind of...
Hearing is that regulation will stifle innovation, right? But what I find really tricky about this kind of approach is that when we're talking about the dangers of AI, I mean, first of all, it's disproportionate, obviously, on those who know the least about how AI is being used against them. And then, of course, there are other kind of factors like, say, data centers and energy and the impact it has on the environment, et cetera. So I think what I'm kind of trying to understand is that, is it possible for there to be...
Modeling world is just, we have started looking at it. There are lots to come and it'll come. So that's where the innovation comes into picture. So world over what's happening is that two things. One is that there is this frameworks that are there for assessment from the developer side. They can always do that. Like NIST AI RMF framework and things like that are there. Again, ISO IEC standard is there, 42001. These things developers can do themselves, and the entity which is involved in it, they should take that more, doing that. Now, on the regulatory side, what I see is like what in the SEBI case, what you talked, in the financial side, they have been nicely doing this sandboxing exercises. I think that's what probably one can try to do, and then policy prototyping. Some of these things, right? Before you do a massive rollout for health or those kind of thing, you can do some POCs, you can do some prototype, and then do it. But getting into the intricacies, because those things will keep changing. The manner in which these algorithms evolve and newer models that will come, those will keep, and that's a challenge, but that's a challenge globally, and that will rapidly also happen. And what we are seeing even in the cyber security, cryptographic world also, for example, for the past 40, 50 years, world has lived with just 2, 3 algorithms, AES, RSA, ECC. Now, because of the quantum resiliency coming up, so within the last, there was a challenge that was done by the US competition, NIST challenge. Algorithms have started coming for crypto algorithms very rapidly, and that's another totally a different ball game to worry about. So we are actually in a situation in multiple dimensions from technology, things are rapidly advancing, but we cannot have stricter ways to just fine-tune our way to looking at it. So I think effective certification assurance method should be there, and leave it at that is what the technical.
Perfect enough to completely monitor what is the ground situation. If we make a policy in India, it will stay for 5 years, right? A minimum. And if we make a regulation in India, that takes years to get an amendment. Sometimes at least a small thing to be changed in a regulation, it takes 1-2 years to easily amend. By that time, technology gets changed, the people change, the skill force change, because if new technologies are coming up, maybe we are even not equipped with the skilled workforce which we have. So the regulation doesn't have to be very, very mandatorily going into the crisp of the problem statement. However, the accountability can be. If we assign who is the right party to look into, like he is talking about the BS standards and all. I'm also part of the BS committee for the battery and electric vehicles. So there we define in the safety, if we are talking about who is the authority who is going to ensure this is right now is happening in the right way. If something is dumping from the China yard, we should have a correct mechanism that who is going to dump it, how is he going to use it, is he following the same thing which is when something is getting out of from the shipment, he might be giving something in return, but when he uses it, that might be different. So that's where the problems comes in. So the regulation should be very, very light touched, but the accountability and the responsibility, those plays a major role to avoid these kind of scenarios in next few years. True. True. That's where I'm talking about the accountability.
So we have the system of, in India, there are actually regulations on how to build footpath. Would anybody believe it? So we can write regulations in number of things. It's a question about what she says is about accountability and implementation. And it's very difficult in any government system. So I am a votary of the fact that when young people, get in the market to try to do things and they push at each other's projects, that probably gives a much better outcome. We know what's happening in Goa on the taxi issue. The government mandated one versus the tourist sweat one. I mean, we know what's exactly there. So it's essentially very risky. However, I won't get into many of the stories. Let me instead ask questions, or if Moshe allows. Oh, we have done. So strict ship, she's the person and she says, we can, but I'll just take one question from her. She's been quiet.
Level AI usage. Thank you so much for touching upon, different models that there are. Because, there are, in a lot of these conversations, we're talking about data. We're talking about, but in India, we don't have India models as of now. So which is preparing us for the next wave. But right now, we are all using ready-to-use models, commoditized, which are not built in India. But there is not enough conversation about, and again, just to add to it, people are not even fine-tuning those models. Like very few organizations are fine-tuning those models. I've had conversations with large AI organizations who are building their own custom models, but for simplistic of tasks. They still use OpenAI kind of models, okay? Because they would not want to do, generic work. So they would only focus on what they are building on. So there is a very big role which these closed box, black box models play in our day-to-day lives right now. But there is not enough conversation about how they are impacting us, because that's major part of the ecosystem. So I just want to hear a little bit more on what's your take on
Designing those models, but also need to have resources to do some of those things. But definitely looking at open weighted based model is a way to go. No problem with it. I think that's we can customize it. I think the developers would soon get used to that kind of thing when a lot of innovators come from India. That's what I believe truly. And
right now, when people are using the models
right.
are not based in India, there's no point of having so much data conversation, but more about what are the regulations to keep us.
No, but even in the closed weighted model, you can train it. See, you will not be able to adjust the finer aspect of it, but you can kind of train it with the data.
This is the room where the developers and others are all working. You introduce the government in it, and there'll be a cubicle right then, along with the peon and another thing, and that'll be the end of this one. So let's not bring government into this word. And I think I'm very scared about getting government where it doesn't belong.
Yeah. So, three quick things. Number one, I'm sure that most of you know about Bhashini. which is the model for translation of across Indian languages. You know how many sort of pairs it uses? Only 22. It should have used 321, okay? NC, if you remember the formula of combinations, okay? But it uses only 22. Why? Because it is like X to English and then back from English to Y, okay? So that's why there are only 22 pairs. So that's one smart way of doing things. That's one. So with a low resource itself, you can do something which still gives you about 80-90% accuracy. Second thing is, under India AI mission, as we know, the government itself is augmenting some sort of computational infrastructure, etc., which should become available to the developers and users. Of course, not to that extent, but in some way. Thirdly, large language models are not the only thing which can and should be done. I won't be surprised if there are nano models that may come up in future. And one small sort of quirk, which is, as Rajesh just did mention about aviation. So in aviation in India, suppose there's a dispute between GMR and Airport Authority of India, or GVK and or Adani or somebody like that. Do you know where the appeal would lie? Any guesses? Where?
Abroad.
No. Appeal. He's right. TDSAT. And TDSAT stands for Telecom Disputes Settlement and Appellate Tribunal. Why? Because there was an Airport Economic Regulatory Authority of India Act, under which there was a separate tribunal. That tribunal also got merged in 2017 by late Arun Jaitley, then Finance Minister, in TDSAT. So going forward, what's going to happen is this. TDSAT is doing telecom, which was their mandate from 2000. Broadcasting was added on 9 January 2004. Okay? So today, in fact, 85% of their workload is broadcasting, not telecom. Going forward, they have already got in 2017, apart from airport, they also got the IT Act Cyber Appellate Tribunal as well. And very importantly, now, because 2 days back, the rules under the Digital Data Protection Act have been notified. So under that, once the Data Protection Board of India, all the appeals will also lie at TDSAT. The interesting thing is this. In terms of state capacity, 2000, the structure was 1 chairperson, 2 members. 2004, structure was 1 chairperson, 2 members. 2017, the structure was 1 chairperson, 2 members. Today, again, we still have 1 chairperson, 2 members. Thank you.
Thank you to our panelists, Mr. Deepak Maheshwari, Mr. N. Subramanian, Ms. Bindu Madhavi ma'am, and Mr. Rajesh Vecha, as well as thank you to Mr. Shubhramesh sir as well for chairing this session so well. I think this discussion reinforces that as AI becomes central to the critical infrastructure of not just the world, but especially to India, accountability must be built from the start itself. Whether through principal designs, shared responsibility, or adaptive regulation, our aim is innovation that remains safe, transparent, and trustworthy. So with that, we close this session.